You are replaceable.
You're replaceable. The words hit Elena Sinclair like a blade between her ribs. She stood in the center of the grand foyer of Sinclair Manor, her hand instinctively moving to the swell of her pregnant belly, as if she could shield her unborn child from the venom dripping from her husband's lips. Alexander Sinclair didn't even look at her as he said it. He was adjusting his cufflinks in the gilded mirror by the door, his reflection cold and perfect, the face of a man worth $14 billion, the heir to the Sinclair empire, the prince of Manhattan's elite, and the man who had made her life a living nightmare for the past 7 months. Alexander, please, Elena's voice cracked. The doctor said stress isn't good for the baby. If you could just, the baby. He laughed, a short, cruel sound that echoed through the marble halls. You mean the accident you're carrying? The complication I never asked for? He finally turned to face her, and Elena felt her blood freeze. There was nothing in his eyes. No love, no recognition, not even hatred, just the cold, clinical dismissal of a man looking at something he considered beneath him. I told you when we married that this was an arrangement, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow more terrifying than shouting. Your father's company was drowning. I saved it. In exchange, I got a wife who would smile at galas and stay out of my way. He stepped closer, and Elena resisted the urge to step back. I did not ask for a child. I did not plan for a child. And I certainly didn't plan for one with you. The words hung in the air like poison. Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had learned, in 7 months of marriage, that tears only made Alexander colder. Then why did you? She stopped, the memory of that night rising unbidden. The charity gala, the champagne, the way he had looked at her for one brief, confusing moment like she was something more than a transaction. Why did I what? Alexander's lips curled into a smirk. Make a mistake? Even billionaires have those, Elena. The difference is, we fix them. He grabbed his coat from the rack and headed for the door. Victoria is joining me for dinner tonight. Don't wait up. The door slammed behind him, and Elena finally let herself crumble. Now, if that opening didn't make your blood boil, I don't know what will. Before we go any further, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This story is about to take turns you won't see coming. And drop a comment right now. Tell me what you think Alexander's real secret is. Trust me, you're not going to guess it. Victoria. The name had haunted Elena since her wedding day. Victoria Ashford was everything Elena wasn't. Tall, blonde, sculpted by the best surgeons money could buy, and dripping with the kind of old money confidence that made other women feel invisible. She had been Alexander's girlfriend before Elena entered the picture, and apparently, their relationship hadn't ended just because he had married someone else. Elena had found out about Victoria 3 weeks after the wedding. She had come home early from charity luncheon, hoping to surprise Alexander with the news that she'd been invited to join the board of the Metropolitan Children's Foundation. It was a small victory, but she thought maybe, foolishly, that it might impress him, that it might make him see her as more than a contractual obligation. Instead, she'd found Victoria in their bedroom, not in a compromising position. No, Victoria was too smart for that. She was simply sitting on Elena's side of the bed, flipping through Elena's jewelry box like she owned it. Oh, Victoria had said, not even bothering to look surprised. You're home early. Elena had stood frozen in the doorway, her heart pounding. These are lovely, Victoria continued, holding up a pair of diamond earrings, the only thing Elena had left from her grandmother. A bit dated, though. You should let me take you shopping. I know all of Alexander's favorite designers. The message was clear. I belong here. You don't. From that day forward, Victoria was a constant presence. She appeared at every gala, every dinner, every board meeting. She sat next to Alexander at charity events while Elena was placed at the far end of the table. She called him at all hours, texted him constantly, and made sure Elena knew about every single interaction. And Alexander did nothing to stop it. In fact, he encouraged it. Victoria understands the Sinclair legacy, he had told Elena once, when she'd finally worked up the courage to confront him. She comes from a family that matters. She knows how to carry a name like ours. And I don't. Elena had whispered. Alexander had looked at her with something approaching pity. Elena, your father ran a mid-tier manufacturing company that was 6 months from bankruptcy when I acquired it. You grew up in a 4-bedroom house in Connecticut, not a penthouse in Paris. You went to a state university, not the Sorbonne. He'd shaken his head slowly. You're a good person. I'm sure of that. But you're not Sinclair material. You never were. That night, Elena had cried herself to sleep for the first time since her mother died. But she hadn't cried since. Something in her had hardened after that conversation. Some small, stubborn flame that refused to be extinguished. Alexander wanted her to feel small? Fine. Alexander wanted her to disappear? She would survive. She had survived worse. Elena's childhood hadn't been easy, despite what Alexander assumed about her comfortable upbringing. Yes, her father owned a company. Yes, they'd lived in a nice house. But behind closed doors, Thomas Warren was a man consumed by his work, absent more than present, leaving Elena to be raised by a rotating cast of nannies and housekeepers. Her mother had died when Elena was 7, a car accident on a rainy highway that had been ruled driver error. Elena had been in the back seat. She'd been the one to hold her mother's hand as the sirens approached, watching the light fade from her eyes. She never spoke about it, not to anyone. After that, Thomas had withdrawn completely. He loved Elena. She knew that, but he didn't know how to show it. So he worked, and worked, and worked, until his company became everything and his daughter became a ghost in her own home. When Thomas's company started failing, when the debts piled up and the investors fled, Elena had been the one to find a solution. She had heard about Alexander Sinclair at a charity event, heard that he was looking to expand into manufacturing, heard that he needed a foothold in the industry her father had spent decades building. She had approached him herself, pitched the acquisition herself, and when Alexander had demanded something more personal as part of the deal, she had agreed. Marriage. A 2-year contract, he called it. A business arrangement. She would be his wife in name only, attending events, maintaining appearances, and at the end of the term, she would receive a generous settlement and her father's company would be saved. Elena had signed without hesitation. She thought she could handle it. 2 years of playing pretend. 2 years of smiling through the pain. And then freedom. But then she'd gotten pregnant. And everything had changed. The pregnancy hadn't been planned. Alexander was right about that. It had happened after the Vanderbilt Gala, 6 months into their marriage. There had been champagne, too much of it, and a rare moment of something that almost resembled connection. Alexander had been different that night. Softer. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was young. He'd listen when she talked about hers. And then, in the darkness of their shared bedroom, he'd reached for her. It was the only time in their marriage that he'd touched her willingly. The only time he'd looked at her like she was human. Elena had let herself hope, just for a moment, that maybe things could change. But the next morning, Alexander had woken up cold again. Distant. He'd looked at her like he couldn't remember why she was there, and he'd left for work without a word. 6 weeks later, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She'd been terrified to tell him. She'd waited until she was sure, until the doctor confirmed it twice, until she could no longer hide the truth. When she finally worked up the courage, Alexander's reaction had been worse than anything she'd imagined. Get rid of it. 3 words, spoken without emotion, without hesitation. Elena had stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. Alexander, this is our child. It's not our anything. He'd stood from his desk and walked to the window, looking out at the Manhattan skyline like it was more interesting than her devastation. I have plans, Elena. Victoria and I have been discussing the future. When our contract ends, I intend to marry her properly, to have children with her. Children who will carry the Sinclair name with dignity. Victoria. Elena's voice had come out strangled. You're planning to, she's having my heir. Alexander had turned to face her, and his expression was blank. Decided. The doctors have already confirmed she can conceive. We've been working on the timing. I was going to tell you after the contract ended, but since you forced the issue, he'd shrugged. Get rid of it. Or don't. But understand this. That child will never be a Sinclair. It will never inherit a single dollar of my fortune. It will never be acknowledged by this family. Elena had walked out of his office without another word, and she had made a decision. She was keeping her baby. Alexander Sinclair be damned. Now, 7 months later, Elena sat alone in her bedroom. The bedroom she'd been moved to on the opposite end of the manor from Alexander, and felt her baby kick. It was a strong kick, defiant, like the child already knew it wasn't wanted and was determined to exist anyway. Elena smiled through her tears. "I want you," she whispered, pressing her hand to her belly. "I want you more than anything in this world, and I'm going to protect you, no matter what it takes." A knock at her door made her jump. "Mrs. Sinclair?" It was Margaret, the head housekeeper, one of the few staff members who still treated Elena with kindness. "You have a visitor, Elena Fronad." She never had visitors. Alexander had made sure of that. "Who is it?" Margaret hesitated. "She says her name is Dorothy. Dorothy Sinclair. She says she's Alexander's grandmother." Elena's blood ran cold. Dorothy Sinclair was a legend, the matriarch of the Sinclair dynasty, the woman who had built the family's fortune from nothing after her husband died young. She was 93 years old, reportedly bedridden, and hadn't made a public appearance in over a decade. And she was here. "Send her up," Elena said quietly. 2 minutes later, the door opened, and Dorothy Sinclair wheeled herself into the room. She was small, frail, and ancient, but her eyes were sharp and knowing and fixed on Elena with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "So," Dorothy said, her voice stronger than Elena expected. "You're the one." Elena stood, unsure how to respond. "Mrs. Sinclair, it's an honor to meet you. I didn't know you were still alive." Dorothy let out a dry laugh. "Neither did most people. My grandson prefers to pretend I don't exist. Easier to control the narrative that way." She wheeled closer, her eyes dropping to Elena's belly. "That's his child." "Yes." Elena's voice was steady. "But he doesn't want it. He's made that very clear." "I know what he's made clear." Dorothy's expression darkened. "I know everything that happens in this family, whether they like it or not. I know about Victoria. I know about the contract. I know about the things my grandson has said and done." She reached out and took Elena's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I also know things that Alexander doesn't. Things that would destroy him if they ever came to light." Elena's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Dorothy's eyes bore into hers. "The child you're carrying. Alexander thinks it's worthless. A mistake. An accident he can throw away." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "But that child is the only legitimate Sinclair heir. The only one. And the reason Alexander hates you, the real reason, has nothing to do with you at all." She paused, and her next words made Elena's world collapse. "It's because he knows, somewhere deep in his bones, that he was never supposed to inherit this fortune. That everything he has was built on a lie." Elena couldn't breathe. "What lie?" Dorothy's smile was sad and terrible. "Alexander isn't my grandson. He isn't a Sinclair at all. And the people who raised him, the people he calls family, have been deceiving him since the day he was born." And that's where we're going to pause part 1. Now I know your mind is spinning. Who is Alexander really? What is this lie? And what does it mean for Elena and her baby? If you want to find out, make sure you're subscribed and you've liked this video. Drop a comment with your theory. I'm reading every single one. Let's get into part 2. Part 2. The lies that built an empire I don't understand. Elena's voice came out broken, barely audible, as she sank onto the edge of her bed. Dorothy Sinclair sat across from her, ancient hands folded in her lap, eyes carrying the weight of secrets held for decades. "You need to understand," Dorothy said quietly, "because what I'm about to tell you will change everything. And you need to be prepared." Elena's hand moved to her belly, where her baby kicked again, that same defiant, determined kick. "Tell me." Dorothy took a long breath, and when she spoke, her voice seemed to travel backward through time. 63 years ago, I had 2 children, twin boys, Richard and Edward. They were my everything, all that remained of my husband after he died in the war. I raised them alone, built this empire from nothing, sacrificed everything to give them a future." Her eyes grew distant. Richard was the elder by 4 minutes. He was bright, kind, compassionate. He had his father's heart. Edward was different, ambitious, calculating. Even as a child, he wanted what he wasn't given. He wanted to be first. Elena listened in silence, afraid to interrupt. When the boys turned 25, I announced that Richard would inherit the company. It was his birthright. He was the eldest. And more importantly, he was the one I trusted to carry our family's values forward. Dorothy's jaw tightened. Edward didn't take it well. He raged. He threatened. He told me I was making a mistake, that Richard was weak, that only he had the strength to lead. She paused. And then, 1 week before the official announcement was to be made public, Richard disappeared. Elena's blood ran cold. Disappeared, vanished, without a trace. The police searched for months. They found nothing. No body, no evidence, nothing. Dorothy's voice cracked for the first time. I knew, in my heart, I knew that Edward was responsible, but I could never prove it. And without proof, she trailed off, her eyes filling with tears she refused to shed. Edward inherited everything. He married a socialite named Catherine. They had a son, Charles, who grew up to be just as ruthless as his father. And Charles married a woman named Priscilla, who gave him a son named Alexander. Dorothy looked at Elena, and her gaze was piercing. Or at least, that's what the world believes. Elena felt the ground shifting beneath her. What do you mean? Alexander isn't Charles's biological son. Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper. He isn't a Sinclair at all. Priscilla had an affair with the family's driver of all people. She got pregnant, passed the child off as Charles's, and no one ever questioned it. How do you know this? Because I had a DNA test done. Dorothy's lips curved into a grim smile. 20 years ago, I started to suspect. Something about Alexander never felt right to me. He had none of Richard's kindness, none of my late husband's features. So I arranged for a test, secretly, without anyone's knowledge. She pulled a yellowed envelope from her cardigan pocket. The results confirmed what I suspected. Alexander shares no genetic markers with the Sinclair bloodline. He is not Charles's son. He is not my great-grandson. He has no legal claim to this fortune. Elena stared at the envelope, her mind reeling. But why didn't you say anything? Why didn't you expose them? Dorothy's face crumpled with decades of pain. Because I was dying. The doctors had given me 6 months to live 20 years ago. I was weak, bedridden, convinced I would be gone before I could do anything with the information. She laughed bitterly. Instead, I lived, year after year, watching Edward and Charles and Priscilla destroy everything I built. Watching Alexander grow into a man just as cruel as the family that raised him. She reached out and gripped Elena's hand. But then you came along, and everything changed. Me? Elena shook her head. I'm nobody. Alexander married me for a business deal. He hates me. He hates you because he knows. The words stopped Elena cold. What? Not consciously. Dorothy's eyes narrowed. But somewhere in the deepest part of his soul, Alexander has always sensed that he doesn't belong. That he's an imposter. That the family who raised him never truly loved him. They only loved the illusion they created. She leaned forward. When he met you, something shifted. You threatened him. Not with power or money, but with authenticity. You are exactly what you appear to be. Genuine, kind, real. Everything Alexander pretends to be, but isn't. Dorothy's voice dropped. And the child you carry, that child is a threat to everything. Because if anyone ever discovered the truth about Alexander's parentage, your baby would become the only legitimate Sinclair heir. Elena felt like she was falling. But my baby isn't. I'm not a Sinclair by blood, no. Dorothy smiled, and for the first time, it reached her eyes. But I am, and before I die, I intend to make things right. She pulled another document from her pocket. This is my will. The real one, not the version my lawyers have on file. It states that my entire estate, everything Edward and Charles and Alexander think they own, will pass directly to Richard's bloodline upon my death. Elena's breath caught. Richard's bloodline? But you said Richard disappeared. He didn't disappear. Dorothy's voice shook with emotion. He was hidden by people who loved him, people who knew that Edward would kill him if he stayed. She reached into her cardigan one more time and pulled out a photograph. It showed a young man, dark-haired, kind-eyed, with a smile that seemed achingly familiar. Richard didn't die, Dorothy whispered. He escaped. He changed his name, built a new life, and eventually he had a daughter. Elena looked at the photograph, and her heart stopped. She knew that face. She had seen it every day of her childhood, smiling at her from across the breakfast table, driving her to school, teaching her to ride a bike. It was her father, Thomas Warren. Thomas Warren was Richard Sinclair. Her father was the true Sinclair heir, and that meant she, Elena, was the legitimate inheritor of a $14 billion fortune. Take a moment to breathe, because I know that was a lot. If your jaw just dropped, hit that like button right now. And if you're dying to know what happens next, make sure you're subscribed, because we're just getting started. My father, Elena whispered, her voice hollow. My father is Richard Sinclair. Dorothy corrected gently. He died 3 years ago, as you know, but not before telling me where to find you. Elena's head snapped up. He told you. We never lost touch. Not completely. Dorothy's eyes glistened. When Richard fled, he sent me letters through trusted intermediaries. Once a year, every year for 58 years. He told me about his life, his new name, his business, his wife, his daughter. She smiled softly. He told me about you, Elena. He told me you were the best thing that ever happened to him, that you had your mother's courage and his father's heart. Elena's tears finally fell. All those years, thinking her father was distant because he didn't know how to love her. All those years, believing she wasn't enough. He had been protecting her, carrying secrets that could have gotten them both killed. He wanted to tell you, Dorothy continued. When his company started failing, when he realized he would have to ask for help, he wanted to explain everything. But he was afraid that if Edward's descendants discovered the truth, they would destroy you the way they destroyed him. So instead, he let me marry Alexander. Dorothy nodded slowly. He thought it was safer. If you were inside the family, protected by the Sinclair name, they would have no reason to hurt you. He didn't know what Alexander would become. He didn't know how cruel. Her voice broke. I should have intervened sooner. I should have told you everything before you married him. But I was weak, and I was afraid, and I convinced myself that waiting was the right thing to do. She gripped Elena's hands fiercely. I won't make that mistake again. The child you're carrying is the true Sinclair heir, the only legitimate descendant of my bloodline, and I will do whatever it takes to protect you both. Elena's mind raced. But Alexander, the family, they'll never accept this. They'll fight you. They'll destroy the will, bribe the courts, do whatever it takes. Let them try. Dorothy's voice hardened. I have spent 20 years preparing for this moment. I have documentation, witnesses, evidence of every crime Edward and his descendants have committed, including the truth about what happened to my Richard. Her eyes turned cold. Edward didn't just make my son disappear. He tried to have him killed, hired men to murder his own brother for the sake of an inheritance. She paused. Richard escaped by sheer luck, but Edward never stopped looking. And when he died, he passed that obsession to Charles, who passed it to Alexander. Elena felt ice spreading through her veins. Alexander knows? He knows about my father? Not yet, but his mother does. Priscilla has always known about Richard's survival. She was the one who helped Charles track him for years. She knows exactly who you are, Elena. She's known since before you married Alexander. The room spun. Priscilla Sinclair, the elegant, silver-haired matriarch who had welcomed Elena into the family with cold smiles and backhanded compliments. The woman who had never quite looked Elena in the eye. She had known. All along, she had known. That's why they chose me, Elena breathed. That's why Alexander agreed to the marriage. It wasn't just about my father's company. It was about getting close to me, controlling me, making sure I never discovered the truth. Dorothy nodded grimly. They married you to contain the threat. And when you got pregnant, when you created an heir that could legitimately claim the Sinclair fortune, they panicked. Elena's hand flew to her belly. Victoria, she whispered. Victoria's baby is their backup plan. If they can produce an heir through Victoria before your child is born, they believe they can invalidate your claim. They're planning to destroy your marriage, declare your child illegitimate, and install Victoria's baby as the next generation of their lie. Elena felt rage building in her chest. Hot, righteous rage that burned away her fear. I won't let them. No. Dorothy's smile was fierce. You won't. And neither will I. Over the next 3 weeks, Elena lived a double life. On the surface, nothing changed. She attended the mandatory family dinners, smiled through Alexander's cruelty, and endured Victoria's triumphant smirks. She played the role of the beaten-down wife, the woman who had accepted her place at the bottom of the Sinclair hierarchy. But behind closed doors, she was preparing for war. Dorothy's lawyers, a team of ruthless attorneys she had cultivated over decades, began gathering evidence. DNA tests were conducted. Documents were authenticated. Witness statements were taken from servants who had worked for the family for generations and had seen things they had been paid to forget. And Elena began digging into her own past. She found letters her father had hidden in a safety deposit box she never knew existed. Letters from Dorothy. Letters from Richard to his unborn daughter, written in the months before Elena was born. My darling girl, one letter read, you will never know the family you came from, and perhaps that is for the best. The Sinclairs are a name built on blood and betrayal. But you carry something they could never buy or steal, a pure heart. Promise me you will never let anyone dim your light. Promise me you will be brave. Elena read those letters 100 times, tears streaming down her face. Her father had loved her, desperately, completely. He had given up everything, his name, his inheritance, his family, to protect her. And she would not let his sacrifice be in vain. The confrontation came sooner than expected. It was a Tuesday evening when Priscilla Sinclair summoned Elena to the library. The matriarch sat in a leather armchair by the fire, a glass of wine in her hand, looking every inch the elegant predator she had always been. Sit down, Elena. Elena remained standing. Priscilla's lips curved into a thin smile. Defiance? How charming. I suppose you think you've won something. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence. Priscilla set down her wine. I know you've been meeting with Dorothy. I know about the lawyers, the DNA tests, the documents. Did you really think you could move against this family without me noticing? Elena's heart pounded, but she kept her face calm. I'm not moving against anyone. I'm protecting my child. Your child. Priscilla laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. That child is a complication, Elena. A mistake that should have been corrected months ago. My child is a Sinclair. The only real Sinclair in 3 generations. The words hung in the air. Priscilla's expression flickered, just for a moment, with something that looked like fear. You don't know what you're talking about. I know everything. Elena stepped closer, emboldened by months of rage and weeks of preparation. I know that Edward had his brother killed. Or tried to. I know that Alexander isn't Charles's son. I know that you've been lying to this family, to the world for decades. Priscilla rose slowly, her face hardening. Even if any of that were true, which it isn't, no one would believe you. You're a nobody, Elena, a contractor's daughter who married above her station and got herself knocked up. The courts will laugh you out of the room. Will they? Elena smiled. Dorothy doesn't seem to think so. Priscilla's composure cracked. That senile old woman is on her deathbed. She doesn't know what year it is, let alone. She knows exactly what she's doing. And when she presents her evidence to the board, to the courts, to the world, you and your family will lose everything. Elena turned to leave, but Priscilla's voice stopped her. Walk out that door, and I will destroy you. I will take that baby from your arms the moment it's born. I will have you declared unfit, institutionalized, erased. By the time I'm done, no one will even remember your name. Elena looked back over her shoulder. My father spent his whole life running from this family. He was afraid of what you would do to him, what you would do to me. She placed her hand on her belly. But I'm not my father, and my child will not grow up in fear. She walked out without another word. Behind her, Priscilla Sinclair reached for her phone with trembling hands. We have a problem, she said into the receiver. It's time for the contingency plan. And that, my friends, is the end of part 2. Priscilla is making her move. Elena is fighting back. And the baby isn't even born yet. What do you think the contingency plan is? Drop your theories in the comments right now. And if you're not subscribed yet, this is your final warning. Part 3 is where everything explodes. Let's finish this. Part 3. The air rises. The contingency plan came at midnight. Elena was asleep, or trying to sleep, when the bedroom door burst open. 2 men in dark suits stormed in, followed by Alexander, whose face was twisted with cold fury. "Get up!" Elena scrambled backward on the bed, her hands flying to her belly. "Alexander, what?" "I said get up." He grabbed her arm and yanked at her feet. "Did you really think you could humiliate this family and walk away? Did you really think my mother would let you destroy everything we've built? Let go of me." Elena struggled, but Alexander's grip was iron. "You're being committed." His voice was flat, emotionless. "The doctors have already signed the papers. Prenatal psychosis, they're calling it. Delusions about family conspiracies, paranoid behavior, a threat to yourself and your unborn child. That's a lie, is it?" Alexander's smile was cruel. "Who do you think they'll believe, Elena? A billionaire with an army of lawyers, or a hysterical pregnant woman making wild accusations about DNA tests and secret heirs?" He nodded to the men, who moved toward her. "Take her." Elena screamed. She fought. She clawed at the men's faces, kicked at their shins, did everything she could to break free. But she was 8 months pregnant and outnumbered, and within minutes they had her restrained. "My baby," she gasped as they dragged her toward the door. "Alexander, please, whatever you think of me. This is your child too. That thing is not my child." Alexander's face was stone. It never was. And by morning, it won't exist. Elena's blood turned to ice. They weren't just committing her. They were going to take her baby. No. She thrashed wildly, adrenaline surging through her veins. "No, you can't do this. You can't." The needle came from nowhere. A sharp sting in her neck, then spreading warmth, then darkness creeping at the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness took her was Alexander's face, cold, triumphant, and utterly without remorse. Then nothing. Elena woke to white walls and the smell of antiseptic. She was in a hospital bed, her wrists strapped down, her belly still heavy with her child. Machines beeped steadily beside her. Through the window, she could see it was daylight. Hours had passed. How many hours? How many days? "She's awake." The voice came from the corner of the room. Elena turned her head and saw a woman in a white coat, a doctor, mid-50s with cold eyes and a clipboard. "Where am I?" Elena's voice came out cracked and raw. "Where's my baby?" "Your baby is fine. For now." The doctor made a note on her clipboard. "You're at Pinehurst Psychiatric Institute. You've been admitted for evaluation." "I'm not crazy." "That's what they all say." The doctor smiled thinly. "Your husband has provided extensive documentation of your erratic behavior. Paranoid delusions, violent outbursts, threats against family members. I'm afraid you'll be here for quite some time." Elena pulled against her restraints. "This is kidnapping. You can't keep me here. We can do whatever is necessary to protect your child." The doctor's smile widened. "Speaking of which, given your unstable condition, the family has petitioned for immediate custody upon birth. A judge has already approved the request. Your baby will be placed with its father where it belongs." "No." Tears streamed down Elena's face. "No, please, you don't understand. They're going to hurt my baby. They're going to rest now, Mrs. Sinclair." The doctor moved toward the door. "You're going to need your strength." The door clicked shut, and Elena was alone. She lay there in the silence, her mind racing, her heart shattered. Everything she had fought for, everything Dorothy had promised, it was crumbling. Alexander had won. Priscilla had won. Her baby would be taken, hidden, probably killed to eliminate the threat to their empire. And there was nothing she could do. Or was there? Elena closed her eyes and forced herself to breathe. To think. Dorothy had warned her this might happen. They had planned for contingencies. There had to be something, some fail-safe, some way to the window. Elena's eyes snapped open. A small piece of paper was taped to the inside of the glass. It was almost invisible, a tiny white square against the white frame. But it was there. She squinted, trying to read the words written in cramped handwriting. Help is coming. Stay strong. And Margaret, the housekeeper who had shown her kindness when no one else would. Elena felt hope flicker in her chest. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. If that moment just gave you chills, smash that like button. We're in the final stretch now, and justice is coming. The rescue came at 3 in the morning. Elena had pretended to sleep, had faked compliance with the nurses, had done everything possible to lower their guard. And when the door finally opened, slowly, silently, she was ready. Mrs. Sinclair. The voice was unfamiliar. Elena opened her eyes to see a man in hospital scrubs, young, dark-haired, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in this nightmare. My name is James, he said, quickly undoing her restraints. I'm Dorothy's nephew. Real nephew. Richard sighed. She sent me. Elena's heart soared. Dorothy, is she? She's waiting. But we have to move now. Security changes shifts in 4 minutes. Elena swung her legs over the side of the bed, ignoring the dizziness that threatened to overwhelm her. James handed her a coat and a pair of slip-on shoes. Can you walk? I can do whatever I need to do. They moved through the halls like ghosts, past sleeping nurses, around corners, through doors that James somehow had keys for. Elena didn't ask questions. She just moved, one hand on her belly, the other gripping James's arm. 3 minutes later, they were outside. A black sedan waited in the parking lot, engine running. The back door opened, and Elena saw Margaret's face. Get in, child. Quickly. Elena climbed in, and the car was moving before the door was even closed. Dorothy, she gasped. At the courthouse. Margaret's voice was steady. The emergency hearing starts at 6. Everything is in place. But Alexander, Priscilla, they'll stop us, they'll try. Margaret's smile was fierce. But Dorothy has been preparing for this moment for 20 years. And she's not the only one. Elena didn't understand what that meant until an hour later, when the car pulled up to the Manhattan Federal Courthouse, and she saw what was waiting for them. Cameras. Hundreds of them. Reporters from every major network. Photographers jostling for position. Crowds of people held back by police barriers. And standing at the top of the courthouse steps, flanked by lawyers and looking more alive than she had in decades, was Dorothy Sinclair. Elena. Dorothy's voice carried across the chaos. Kulme. It's time the world learned the truth. The courtroom was packed. Elena sat in the front row, her hands folded protectively over her belly, as Dorothy took the stand. The judge, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, looked on with barely concealed astonishment as the evidence was presented. DNA tests confirming Alexander's lack of Sinclair blood. Letters from Richard to Dorothy, documenting decades of correspondence. Financial records showing Edward's conspiracy to eliminate his brother. Testimony from servants, lawyers, and doctors who had witnessed the family's crimes and been paid to stay silent. And finally, the most damning evidence of all, a recording. A recording of Priscilla Sinclair, made just 3 days ago, instructing her lawyers to eliminate the pregnancy by any means necessary. The courtroom gasped. Alexander, seated at the defendant's table, went pale. This is inadmissible, his lawyer sputtered. This recording was obtained illegally. The recording was made by a member of Mrs. Sinclair's own household staff, Dorothy's attorney countered. A staff member who will testify that she was asked to administer a substance to Mrs. Elena Sinclair's food, a substance designed to induce premature labor. The judge's face hardened. Is this true? The doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and Margaret stepped through. She walked down the aisle with the quiet dignity of a woman who had spent her life serving others and had finally decided to serve the truth. It's true, Your Honor, she said, her voice steady. I have worked for the Sinclair family for 37 years. I have seen things that would turn your stomach, and I will testify to every single one of them. The trial lasted 3 hours. By the end, Alexander Sinclair was facing criminal charges for conspiracy, fraud, and attempted kidnapping. Priscilla was arrested on charges of attempted murder. Victoria Ashford, subpoenaed as a witness, broke down on the stand and admitted that her pregnancy was fabricated, a lie designed to provide Alexander with a legitimate heir. And Elena, Elena watched it all from her seat in the front row, her hand on her belly, tears streaming down her face. It was over. The nightmare was finally over. 3 weeks later, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Hope. Dorothy was there for the birth, holding Elena's hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement through every moment of pain. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced, screaming, perfect, Dorothy held her with trembling hands and tears streaming down her ancient face. "She has Richard's eyes," she whispered. "My boy's eyes." Elena smiled through her exhaustion. "She has her own eyes. She's going to be her own person." "Yes." Dorothy kissed the baby's forehead. "She is. And she's going to have the life we couldn't give him. The life she deserves." 6 months later, Elena stood in the boardroom of Sinclair Industries, no longer as a disgraced wife, but as the company's new chairwoman. The board had voted unanimously to install her after Dorothy's will was executed. The Sinclair fortune, all $14 billion of it, had passed to Elena and her daughter, the only legitimate heirs to the family name. Alexander was in prison, awaiting trial. Priscilla had fled the country, pursued by international warrants. Victoria had disappeared, her fabricated pregnancy and fake life crumbling around her. And Elena was finally free. She stood at the window of her corner office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline her father had once dreamed of conquering. In her arms, Hope gurgled happily, reaching for the sunlight streaming through the glass. "Your grandfather would have loved you," Elena whispered. "He would have been so proud." A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Mrs. Sinclair?" Her assistant stepped in. "There's someone here to see you. She says her name is Dorothy." Elena smiled. "Send her in." Dorothy wheeled herself through the door, looking stronger than she had in months. The doctors had said she might not survive the stress of the trial, but Dorothy had proven them wrong, as she had proven wrong everyone who had ever underestimated her. "How's my great-great-granddaughter?" Dorothy asked, reaching for Hope. Elena placed the baby gently in her arms. "Perfect, as always." "Good." Dorothy looked up at Elena with shining eyes. "And how are you?" Elena considered the question. 6 months ago, she had been a prisoner in her own home, despised, degraded, and dismissed. She had been told she was replaceable, that she was worthless, that the child she carried was a mistake that needed to be erased. Now she stood at the helm of a billion-dollar empire, with a daughter who would never know the fear and shame that had defined Elena's marriage. She had friends, family, a future that stretched out before her like an open road. "I'm happy," Elena said. "For the first time in my life, I'm actually happy." Dorothy smiled. "Then it was all worth it. Every secret, every sacrifice, every year of waiting." She kissed Hope's forehead. "Richard would be proud of you, Elena. Your father would be. So proud." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "I know," she whispered. "I finally know." That evening, after Dorothy had gone home and Hope was asleep in her crib, Elena sat alone in the library of her new penthouse apartment. In her lap was a letter, the last letter her father had ever written, found in his safety deposit box after his death. She had read it 100 times, but tonight, on the 6-month anniversary of her daughter's birth, she read it again. "My darling Elena, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. And if you found this letter, then you've probably discovered the truth about who you are. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you myself. I'm sorry I spent so many years hiding, running, being afraid. I thought I was protecting you, but maybe I was just protecting myself. You are a Sinclair. You are the heir to a fortune built on blood and betrayal. But you're also a Warren, a name I chose because it meant protector. Because that's what I wanted to be for you. I failed in so many ways. I was distant when I should have been present. I was silent when I should have spoken. But I loved you, Elena. Every moment of every day, I loved you with everything I had. You are stronger than you know, braver than you believe. And whatever storms come your way, I know you will face them with the courage your mother had, and the heart that has always made you extraordinary. Be happy, my darling. That's all I've ever wanted for you. All my love, forever and always, Dad." Elena folded the letter carefully and pressed it to her heart. Outside, the city lights glittered like a million promises. And somewhere, she knew, her father was watching. Proud, at peace, finally home. 1 year later, Elena stood at a podium in front of the Sinclair Industries headquarters, announcing the company's new charitable foundation, the Richard Warren Foundation, dedicated to helping children in foster care find permanent families. Beside her, Hope toddled on unsteady legs, held by Dorothy, who had somehow survived another year through sheer stubbornness and love. In the crowd, Elena saw faces she had come to trust. Margaret, now retired and living comfortably on a pension Elena had insisted upon. James, Dorothy's great-nephew, who had become a trusted friend, and dozens of others who had believed in her when no one else would. My father used to say that family isn't about blood, Elena said into the microphone. It's about the people who show up for you, the people who see you when you feel invisible, the people who love you when you feel unlovable. She looked at Hope, who was giggling at something Dorothy had whispered. I spent years believing I was replaceable, that I didn't matter, that the life I'd been given was all I deserved. Her voice grew stronger, but I was wrong. And if there's anyone out there who feels the way I felt, if there's anyone who's been told they're worthless or unlovable or not enough, I want you to hear me. She leaned into the microphone. You matter. Your story matters. And no one, no matter how rich or powerful, has the right to make you feel otherwise. The crowd erupted in applause, and Elena smiled. Not the practiced smile of a billionaire's wife, but the genuine smile of a woman who had finally found her place in the world. She was Elena Sinclair, mother, chairwoman, survivor, and she would never let anyone make her feel small again. And that, my friends, is the end of our story. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me. This story is proof that the people who underestimate you are often the ones who have the most to lose when you rise. If this touched your heart, leave a comment telling me your favorite moment. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they are not replaceable. And subscribe so you never miss another story like this one. Until next time, the ones who call you replaceable are terrified of your irreplaceable power.